This is Deep Down, and I'm your host, Jordan Hunt. I'm a composer, vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, and self-releasing artist. You might also know me as former violinist in The Irrepressibles, as the long-standing musical companion to Grammy-nominated Olivia Chaney, or as a musical and associate director of the Theo Adams Company. I delve deep as we explore the creative process and life through the lens of a musician, unravelling universal ideas and enigmas through some of my songs and lyrics, and through some of the profound moments that have shaped me. Join me deep down as we embark on this journey together, in search of answers to the elusive question, what do you really feel deep down? In this episode, I explore my apparently eclectic output as a composer and a seemingly disparate career as a musician, an artist, and ask what's the thread that ties it all together, and does that thread even exist? After an early career as a musician where any paid work was good work, and the journey to develop my niche as an artist incrementally narrows the spectrum of my output, has it all paid off to create a united body of work? And deep down, does it even matter? Welcome, listeners. Thanks for joining me deep down for another episode where we unravel and connect and go deeper into the workings of the life of a musician. In this episode, I'm trying to figure out what's the thread that ties it all together. For me, that question means not only what connects all of my musical output, but also what's behind the seemingly sporadic and sometimes random series of roles and jobs and tasks and projects and diversions that make up my so-called career. I find when I'm trying to relay details of my latest project to my dad, or trying to explain to a friend what role I'm undertaking today, these are people who are invested to some extent in my journey, yet it takes a great deal of contextualizing and explanation to try to communicate simply what I'm up to and how it connects to what they've known before. It seems that that's the artist's lot, and it's no bad thing. After all, art shouldn't answer questions, but provoke them. But it does make me stop and think, is there even a connection for myself between all of these different projects? When someone generously inquires, how's the recording? I'm sure it's an open-ended question meant to allow enough wiggle room for a safe response. And when I think to myself, well, which recording are you referring to? The recording of my album that was mainly wrapped up in early 2022, or the recording of some electric violin for a friend's heavy metal album that you couldn't possibly know about unless you're reading my emails. I realise a thorough explanation isn't always necessary. It's akin to asking, how are you? People often just want the simple, fine thanks, you response rather than the 50-minute long thesis you might share with your therapist. There came a point a couple of years back when I was on the verge of releasing my record To the Ocean Floor. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's an EP of mine, though streaming services insist on referring to it as an album because there's 11 tracks. So maybe I ought to acquiesce at some point and admit it's an album, but that's a question for another day. But in my eyes, it's an EP of 10 short piano pieces that culminate in a song, Ocean Floor. And I'm not going to play excerpts of it here, so please go and check it out on any of the streaming services if you haven't already heard it. We could even buy a CD if you're feeling generous. The quick backstory is that I wrote it as a soundtrack to Christopher Thomas's dance theatre work of the same name, commissioned by Sadler's Wells in London and premiered there in summer 2019. My point is that on the verge of releasing this collection of piano pieces plus one song, I had an intense moment of self-doubt. In terms of my release history, which until that point had been spectacularly slim, an EP of 4 songs, Long Lost, and a single, The Sea, To the Ocean Floor didn't seem to fit the mould being sad songs, sporadically released and deeply felt. I mean, the final song on the record, Ocean Floor, was sporadically placed, I guess, on that record and deeply felt, but perhaps a little random in the context of 10 classical piano pieces. It was only 2 years since I'd made any sort of impression on the world in a formalised way with my debut release, Long Lost, self-releasing my music on streaming services and on vinyl and CD, I might add, which, considering my age and experience, was pretty late going, or late coming, whichever way you see it. I'm nothing if not cautious, and so, considering this minimal output, I was terrified of confusing the small listenership I'd developed, thanks to these 5 songs, by suddenly releasing 10 piano pieces, somehow connected with another song, Ocean Floor. I think what I feared was that from the outside it would all appear incoherently random. The thread that connected everything was rather tentative from a marketing perspective. I mean, everything I'd learned thus far about the secret to success was that repetition was key, finding a niche and getting really excellent at that, and all the while hopefully building a following at the same time. And I was about to release To the Ocean Floor music which, to all intents and purposes, was in a completely different genre to anything I'd released, connected only by a vague allusion to the water, a nod, although unconscious nod, to my previous single The Sea, which was released in early 2020. Little side note here, I already covered my affinity or obsession with the water in a previous deep dive episode on the sea, actually, so perhaps go and listen to that next if you want filling in on the backwater backstory. Of course, I had actually written all this music in a relatively short space of time, and both the new song Ocean Floor and the 10 piano pieces that precede it were written in the same flush of ideas and energy, and there had been no or little, if any, outside influences to their trajectory. For some reason, I had felt that it made perfect sense to soundtrack a 30-minute show at Sadler's Wells with a bunch of piano music, which led up to one final song. During the rehearsal process, the dancers we were working with were all very complimentary about the music in the song, and nobody seemed to question why there was piano music, and then suddenly a song to round it all off. And for some reason, I thought it a good idea to put all this time and effort into re-recording and releasing it all to the world. But at the moment before I was about to release it, the question suddenly occurred to me, am I absolutely bonkers to release all of this classical-ish music to my limited number of listeners who seem to only have appeared because I'd released some sad-ish songs? I mean, I'd been making contemporary classical music for almost 20 years before that and hadn't managed to build an iota of what you'd call a following. Would my new listeners all get confused and think I'm loopy and go off and find some other purveyor of sad pop? I realised that also this question and self-doubt felt particularly focused at this moment. It wasn't actually the first time I'd considered it. After all, according to Spotify, my name is attributed to some much more strange and contemporary proper classical music as a composer, released under the NMC label in, I think, 2008 and 2013 respectively, long before people knew me as a singer. Those pieces are An Aesthetic of Lions and Siren, so do go and listen if you're interested. They're not very long. This is the one question that kept rearing its head throughout my whole career to date. What is the thread that ties it all together? And I don't only mean my musical output, but also my multitude of different jobs I've taken on over the years. No doubt I've alluded to the different hats I wear in previous episodes. Even my weekly introductory blurb lists that I'm a composer, vocalist, and multi-instrumentalist. And I've unravelled my compulsion to do any one of those or all of these things in previous episodes. What's my place of magic and what was I made for? But at a certain point, one has to mute the overthinking and start overdoing, or ideally just doing. There's been rather a bit of overdoing recently, but that's for yet another episode, I think. As a result of this overdoing, which is probably fueled by the need to maintain an income, no matter what the task at hand, I've done and been known for doing a multitude of things, not least composer, violinist, pianist, violist, even a cellist, singer, arranger, workshop leader, subtitlist once for an opera, but also a stylist, costume designer, website builder, trustee to a charity, and even Spanish teacher to an unfortunate 5-year-old once. That's the one job where I insisted on giving someone a refund after the lesson, as it had been so terrible, or I'd been so terrible at it. I don't think teaching 5-year-olds is my niche, let's put it that way. But even if I hone in on the solely musical pastimes, it confuses even me which hat I might or should be wearing today. And don't get me started on what clothes I'll be wearing today. One of the great joys of this podcast is to try to gather my thoughts to try to answer that question. The metaphorical hat question, not the real hat question. Or more explicitly, am I composing, singing, playing, teaching, recording, or whichever today? The question remains unanswered, though I suppose today I'm part podcaster, part podcast engineer and producer. And perhaps it doesn't matter as long as it gets done. But it brings me back to this moment before releasing to the ocean floor, where it all came to a rather anxiety-inducing screeching halt. I remember calling up my friend Olivia Cheney, who has heard far too many of my philosophical ramblings in the backseat of our people carrier during month-long tours of the USA, as we face the 8-hour drive down from Seattle to San Francisco again. Don't you wish you were on that car ride with us both? God help our long-suffering tour managers. She offered me some sage perspective and referred to several much more established alternative artists of a similar ilk, such as Sufjan Stevens, who at that time had recently released an album of quite hardcore contemporary piano music, or Owen Pallett, who has written violin concerti and film soundtracks amidst his more mainstream output, or Rufus Wainwright, whose opera diva is certainly a stray away from his usual listenership's usual listening habits. And that's not to mention everyone's apparent favourite Tom York, who now seems firmly planted in the soundtrack genre. At that moment, it certainly put my mind to rest that truly interesting artists produce a truly interesting array of work and aren't limited to the one thing that they may be known for. And she assuaged any doubt I had that by releasing to the ocean floor, I'd immediately lose whatever loyal listenership I'd already amassed. Of course, fears aside, it still doesn't answer the question of what is the thread that ties it all together. It reminds me of conversations I've had with my friend Theo Adams, the director, whom I've worked with closely for over 15 years now, and how ultimately, whatever new idea we're working on together, we're generally admittedly just trying to recreate the previous show over and over again in a different format, in a constant act of refinement, aiming for an unattainable ideal of perfection to make the next show even better than the last time. And that even goes for cross-disciplinary projects, whether we're working on a live show or a music video or a fashion shoot or a party or some kind of TV show. Theo knows and trusts himself so well and has the same vast bank of ideas for all his starting points, at least from my perspective. I can see how every single one of his projects threads together as one through-line train of thought, or in his words, same old rubbish. His wonderfully self-deprecating and amusing perspective on what is actually a hugely important and excellent and transcendent body of work. Though, as he says, you can never really take yourself too seriously, but you can and should take fun very seriously. And the work. But I resonate with that sentiment when it comes to my own songs, which are effectively rehashing the same kinds of emotions, but with different subject matter. Of course, that summary does a huge disservice to both of our work, which is probably very multifaceted from an outside perspective. For example, I not only release songs, but violin, piano, string music, not limiting future releases, and so that's already pretty apparently disparate or diverse, but there must be a thread of internal connection between all of those projects. And I suppose that thread is me. Rather glaringly simple as a conclusion to the question, but deep down the thread that ties it all together must be me, and the work that is ultimately the most connected to that thread is the work that's truly the most unapologetically me. Fundamentally, as an artist, it's not my job or my business to try to thread it together. Unfortunately, I am also the marketing manager of my own self-releasing projects, and the artist me makes the marketing manager me's life incredibly difficult, trying to effectively sell this rather disparate work to a similar audience. I can picture a hardened manager bemoaning their artist's new album, which is not in the same style or vein as their last smash hit. Not that I've had a smash hit. I suppose that's because their role is all to do with sales. It gives me a sense of relief that without a label, I get to make those big decisions about what to release, when, how, etc. Of course, it makes my life a lot harder without any support or backing to keep me on my journey, which is why any support or encouragement from you guys is so important to sustaining my spirits and sustaining my fridge. So please leave me a review. But one comforting thought is that perhaps those listeners who do stick around and who are loyal aren't simply buying into those first 5 songs that I released, but rather they're loyal to the person who is making those first 5 songs, and that I can trust them to make up their own minds as to whether they'd also be interested in 10 contemporary piano pieces or 10 solo violin pieces, as is the case with my EP, The Three Visions, because they come from the same heart and mind as the person who penned and performed those first 5 songs that they'd connected with. And if I get really meta, perhaps the thread that ties it all together isn't only me, who's written all of this music somehow, but rather the thread is the listener, and they can make their own thread in the form of their own playlists of their favourite songs and pieces. And that no matter how I release or share my music, I can't possibly expect anyone to like all this output equally. I mean, I don't even love all of my own songs equally, and so once it's released into the world, it's no longer mine. As the social media posts go, I've just released my album today, and now it is yours. It's actually true. However saccharine that may sound, it's true that just as soon as you release the music and you've let go, it's no longer only yours. It becomes the internal world of the listener. And the listener, they're really the thread that ties it all together. What a wonderful thought. It gives me great hope for the listenership of this podcast, and I'm very grateful for anybody who's listened this far, especially to those few who are up to date and have listened to the whole series so far. If I were to try to abstract the thread inside me that ties all of my music together as it's me, I'm the thread, it's perhaps an oversimplification. It doesn't exactly explain the range of vibes, for want of a better word, that my work has encapsulated over the years. For example, my hit comic operetta, Golden Years, subtitled The Upper Clapton Light Operatic Society's Summer Review of Operatic Hits, a 25-minute rollicking chamber opera with libretto by the inimitable Lauren John Joseph, that's part Acorn Antiques and Fawlty Towers and part Richard Strauss's Capriccio, compared with my extremely slow and stately and serious trumpet solo Siren that I mentioned earlier, written for Bruce Knuckles at the London Sinfonietta, recorded by Alistair Mackey from the London Sinfonietta on the NMC label around the same period. I think both of these older pieces of mine show just how my music was sort of bouncing from one end of the spectrum to the other, both feeling entirely me, but in a rather extreme way, and neither feeling wholly me in a balanced way. There is that thing where the serious work is often taken more seriously than the silly or the fun work, which is a shame, like with the music of the French composer Camille Saint-Saëns, who is very famous for having written The Carnival of the Animals, but actually during his lifetime apparently was really embarrassed by what a smash hit it was, because it's just so fun and silly, and was much more proud of his symphonic works, for example. I'm very fond of that chamber opera, but I'd almost be a bit embarrassed to put it on again. Not because it's not good, but because it's very silly, and I feel terrible to have said that out loud. At the same time, I'm also not sure I'd program that trumpet solo Siren either, because it's just so serious. I equally feel like I wouldn't want to impose that on an audience. So, to answer this question, what's the thread that ties it all together? Of course, the thread is me, but it has taken me an awfully long time to find a happy medium between all the extreme versions of me that I've experimented with over the years, where I can happily write what used to be coined sad boy pop songs, and that might sit happily alongside a minimalist violin solo like Two Alone that I wrote during the lockdown and released in 2022. It's certainly more subtle than sad or melancholic as an overarching theme, as I also think of all of my work in recent years as hopeful, and as though it's on some sort of journey or transformative process. I guess we don't need to put it into words. It's music, and it says everything it needs to just by being music and being played or listened to. Maybe the only thread that we need to concern ourselves with is the fact that it is music. I know I've spoken about To the Ocean Floor today as an example of a rather disparate set of music with 10 piano pieces and a song, Ocean Floor. If you've not already heard it, please go and check it out or revisit it. It will be very glad of your company. And I shall also be doing a special deep dive episode on my song Ocean Floor very soon, on the anniversary week of me and my partner Chris, as this song is about that first and second time we met 6 years ago, so look out for that episode. And in terms of multifaceted and confusing release patterns, just to reassure you, I shan't suddenly be keeping it simple. In fact, I spoke about this in my very first episode, The Pain of Starting Again. I have 2 albums pretty much recorded, one more ready to go than the other. So in the coming months, because it does take that long to do anything when you're doing all of the jobs, I shall be releasing Music for Dance Unseen, which is music for string quartet and piano, also known as a piano quintet, which is a confusing phrase, even if you are familiar with the classical repertoire. But rest assured, this ain't twee classical music. I think I've really managed to keep the thread going in the musical worlds I'm exploring in that set of 8 pieces, each between 4 to 6 minutes each, with an extended central movement. See, I'm already particularly anxious about the fact that there's one movement on that album that is twice as long as all the other tracks. And it's like, oh, that's going to be difficult to get across to anyone. Why is it so long? I just need to chill out. I'm so excited to share those with you soon and want to make sure I do them justice in the marketing stakes. In fact, if you're not already signed up to my mailing list, I plan to share early releases of those tracks to get some feedback from you before the general release. So you can always find my sporadic newsletter sign-up list at my website, jordan-hunt.com/sign-up, I think. Alongside that wonderful classical-ish music, I'll also be releasing, finally, a collection of songs. Why am I so afraid to call it an album? An album of songs called Deep Down, the namesake of this podcast. And again, I'll be teasing those on social media at Jordan Hunt Music and in my newsletter as they are finished. They certainly feel like the most me projects I have at the moment. Though just to give you an idea of quite how thin the thread is stretched at the moment, this month, besides teaching, I'm undoing this. I'll be on tour with my friend Olivia Cheney. She starts to share her 3rd album with audiences across the UK. And I'm still in the middle of a creative arrangement job, this 6-month project with the London Symphony Orchestra's Next Gen scheme, which will premiere on June 13th, 2024 at the Barbican Main Hall in London. I feel this bit's been a bit more of a plug than in normal episodes, but I notice that I can be a little avoidant of spelling out too literally what I'm actually up to, sometimes preferring to circumnavigate the simple facts. But to give you an example of how I'm tying the thread together this month, it can certainly be challenging waking up each day figuring out what the priority is. At some point, I shall share more of my archive once I've had half a day's breather to finalise my Patreon page, and that way you'll be able to hear and decide for yourself whether there is a thread at all from the stuff from way back when. And if there is a thread that ties it all together, please let me know what that is from your perspective. As ever, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to wrap there for today so I can attend to something else on my thread that's not making a podcast. It's not quite teaching. I've got some teaching later on today. It's probably some administration. But thank you for generously offering your attention to my rambling interior world. I hope it's useful for you to reflect on your own inner world and to know that you're not alone. Have a wonderful day. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review this podcast. And if you like it, share it with your friends or on social media. You can find me on all social platforms by searching at Jordan Hunt Music, and you can listen to my music on all good streaming services. Deep Down uses bits of my music nabbed from my songs Ocean Floor and Peter. Check out the show notes on jordan-hunt.com for exclusive tidbits from this podcast. I'd really love to hear from you via DM or email via my website if any of these experiences resonated with you, and if you have questions, suggestions, or requests for future episodes. Thank you so much for listening.